Hello, my name is Anani Francine13, and the name of my channel is The Oil of Amana. So I created this channel to explore topics around health and wellness and spirituality, and this is my second vlog. And before I just jump right into the topic, I do want to make a few disclaimers. They are the exact same disclaimers I made in the first video, child. And those disclaimers are the following. Number one, I am not tech savvy. Please don't expect anything fancy here to start. And number two, I will be reading from some notes that I wrote just to stay on track. So, with that being said, I will jump right in to the topic. And that topic is the planet Mercury and saturated fat. So, in astrology, Mercury is known as the divine ruler of communication. And in this way, Mercury's rulership is extremely vast. It's not just limited to communication between people, but it also includes communication between oneself and the divine or unseen worlds. If you are into this sort of thing, then you're probably already aware that cross-culturally, many mythologies assign their sacred trickster spirits to the planet Mercury. And so in this way, Mercury refines our ability to think critically, to think quickly, and to remain steadfast. In terms of medical astrology, Mercury rules the lungs and the nervous system. It's really the central nervous system that I'll be emphasizing in this video. So the central nervous system is composed of two parts, the brain and the spinal cord. Within the spinal cord are neurons, which communicate by sending signals from the brain to the rest of the body. These neurons are coated by a substance called the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is made of protein and lipids. Lipid is just, a fancy scientific term for fat. So the more fattened one's myelin sheath, then the less likely one is to suffer from neurodegenerative diseases. The more fattened or myelinated one's myelin sheath, then the less likely one is to suffer from neuropsychiatric diseases like severe depression. The more fattened one's myelin sheath, then the more sharp or efficient one's thoughts are, and the better one is able to respond to external stimuli. And because it's relevant to some points I want to address a bit later in the video, I want to mention that external stimuli can be for good or for ill. It could be a threat to one's person, or it could be a new idea or concept that needs to be evaluated, or it could be divine communication. And even though we know quite a bit about the central nervous system, it's still one of the most mysterious organ systems in the body. And as an herbalist, I find it just endlessly, fascinating as a point of study. Even though the medical literature, the scientific literature, doesn't really say it outright, if you just consider the function of the myelin sheath, it can be asserted that it is a physical substance that protects an unseen force. And that unseen force is one's thoughts or consciousness. And so this is the perfect transition into the meat of the video, if you will. And that is the fact that the very foods that build, and maintain the health of the myelin sheath are the very foods that are denigrated as unhealthy. And so enter the first trickster spirit, modern human health information. I came across two articles on the mayoclinic.org that give two very different impressions of saturated fat in particular. In an article entitled Dietary Fat, Know Which to Choose, they state, quote, "The Dietary Guidelines for Americans recommends limiting saturated fat to less than 10% of calories a day. The American Heart Association recommends staying under 7%. Why? Because saturated fat tends to raise cholesterol levels in the blood and increase your risk of heart disease and stroke," unquote. The second article is entitled Analyzing the Role of Diet and Exercise in Myelin Production, and it states, quote, "A diet high in saturated fat in combination with exercise training increases myelin protein expression," unquote. Okay, so the former statement asserting the danger of saturated fat is false and has in fact been walked back by the very organization referenced in the quote. In March of this year, the American Heart Association itself declared that ketogenic, in other words, high-fat diets, are actually quite beneficial for heart health. And so to the point about, saturated fat being neuroprotective, you can add to that the fact that it is also cardioprotective. But still, the idea that saturated fat is bad for you lingers in the public consciousness. And the majority of diet dogma tends to favor the reduction or the total elimination of saturated fat from animal foods, from one's diet. Now, how can that be when the information clearly supporting the fact that saturated fat is not only beneficial, but required for optimal health is available for anyone who cares to take a look? And so now enter another trickster spirit, the climate change spirit. The climate change spirit suggests that by eliminating all animal foods from your diet, you are supporting the health of the planet. The argument is that animal agriculture is a major driving factor in climate change and planetary destruction. The climate change spirit tends to have a profound effect on youth, teens, and young adults in particular, with many suffering severe mental anguish over the issue. It's estimated that over 75% of American schools and universities have a climate change curriculum. The UK is on a similar track with their numbers. And their studies tend to emphasize things like, student action, in which students feel empowered to, walk out of class and demand change from elected officials or, other people in power. Plant-based diets are popular among these students, and their demands often involve pressuring members of the public, other members of the public, to reduce their animal food consumption. Just this past year, students at over 20 universities in the UK participated in a campaign calling for their schools to remove all animal foods from their menus, with one student leader saying that these institutions have a responsibility to move, quote, towards 100% just and sustainable catering, unquote. Stanford University's science communication director wrote in an article, quote, "The worldwide phase-out of animal agriculture, combined with a global shift to a plant-based diet, would effectively halt the increase of greenhouse gases over the next 30 years, unquote. So the rhetoric of both of these individuals really illustrates how dangerous and how seductive the climate change spirit really is. I want to be clear here. There is a crisis on the planet. Entire ecosystems are rapidly being destroyed, and the climate change spirit does an excellent job of creating a sense of urgency in that regard. But the idea that plant-based diets are going to save the planet is a massive deception. It negates and ignores key facts. One such fact that is ignored is the impact of monocropping of plant foods like soy, corn, and wheat. Much of the destruction and ecological, devastation of the Amazon is because of monocropped fields of soy and corn in particular. Now, many plant-based for the planet advocates like to cite the fact that this soy and corn goes to fatten cows for animal food consumption, for meat consumption. But consider the fact that soy and corn are not a part of the natural diet of cows, and 30 to 40% of those crops grown in the Amazon do not go to fatten animals. They go into human food products. And something else that the plant-based for the planet advocates like to avoid is that the soy grown in the United States and Canada, a significant portion of that, a significant portion, goes to very large corporations who produce foods like soy milk, tofu, fake meat, and soybean oil that goes into just standard junk food that people eat. And so the point is that time and advocacy would be better spent progressing ideas around regenerative farming and proper animal and human diets. No matter where the soy and corn ends up, the fact is that topsoil is eroded in the growth of these crops. The population of the bees is being devastated by the growth of these crops, and all for plant foods that are inadequate for the health of people and animals. And it's frustrating that their position is often the loudest in the room. There are plenty of activists and scientists who have pointed out the flaws in the plant-based for the planet argument. One of them is UC Davis's Dr. Frank Mitloehner, who very eloquently pointed out that conflating beef emissions with aviation emissions is extremely misleading. His critics like to point out his connection to the beef industry, but nothing detracts from the truth of his message regarding sustainability. Okay, if you are in London eating mangoes and avocados flown from across the world, your lifestyle is not sustainable. If you are plant-based in Philadelphia, eating coconuts and bananas flown from across the world, your diet, your lifestyle is not sustainable. The climate change spirit encourages people to believe that because they are plant-based, they are morally superior even to people who are consuming local animal foods. Okay, but the fact of the matter is that the most sustainable part of plant-based diets is the ego that it produces from confirmation bias that keeps people on a loop of believing a certain narrative. A team of researchers at Johns Hopkins University's Center for a Livable Future attempted to debunk Dr. Mitloehner's assertions about sustainability by stating that the U.S. consumes meat and eggs, this is a quote, to the detriment of human health. But their statement proves how either misguided or willfully deceptive they are. As I mentioned earlier, even organizations that touted the danger of saturated fat are starting to walk back their statements. Physiology and human history clearly demonstrate that meat is not a detriment to human health. It's a requirement for human health. The claim about health relies on what Dr. Ken Berry very astutely calls the echo of a lie that saturated fat is unhealthy. I want to make a few final points about the planetary intelligence Mercury and the climate change spirit. If you were to scroll through the social media of any plant-based for the planet activist, or just listen to the mainstream news for that matter, you would be led to believe that there is a consensus on the causes of climate change. But the disagreement between Dr. Mitloehner and the scholars at Johns Hopkins illustrates the fact that there is no consensus on the causes of climate change. But there is a clear agenda, because one side of the argument is promoted above the other. And when animal rights activists join with plant-based for the planet advocates, basic facts about human biology and animal biology are ignored. And we're not able to have real conversations about what is actually sustainable. And so it's my sincere position that, in a sense, the planetary intelligence Mercury is refining the public's ability to decipher the difference between information and programming. Saturated fat, again, has been denigrated for over 50 years to the detriment of the public health. And so it's fair to say that a significant portion of the public is demyelinated and therefore very susceptible to the power of suggestion and ultimately to behavioral control. And so with that being said, I'm going to end, and in the description box, I'm going to place some links to some videos about sustainability and the importance of saturated fat and brain health and nervous system health. My name is Anani Francine 13. The name of my channel is The Oil of Amana. I hope your vision is clear, and I hope your health is blessed.